I wonder if folks can talk, if you all could talk a little bit about the polarization we've seen among the American population, at least in terms of climate. It's becoming more and more of a political identity, what you want or what you don't want, and how does that affect, or should it affect how we cover the story? If some people are going to be closed off to climate stories simply because it has the word climate. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, I'll go. I'll jump in here. I think I've seen something really interesting happen the last few years. There definitely is the polarization, but I think there are more conversations happening. I really believe that. I think it's really not in vogue anymore in the US to be an official climate denier. I mean, just like, whether that's at the political level or your neighbor, because a lot of these impacts are really being felt. That doesn't mean that there's a full-on, embrace, a big hug of climate science and of, making changes in our daily lives or pushing leaders to do that. So actually what I've seen is, whereas a couple of years ago, there was a lot of criticism still of climate science and we'll say denialism, today I see more of the criticism being focused on green energies and, arguing that whether it's the whales are being killed by, offshore wind, or just increasingly strong pushbacks against solar farms, stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of criticism of green energy projects. And so I think there's been a kind of a shift in that, from denialism to now focus on things that have been identified as solutions. And a lot of times there's real debate, right? I'm not trying to say that every green energy project is perfect or that by any stretch. All these things need to be debated. But that's the shift that I've seen in the polarization, just kind of a shifting of what you're focusing and criticizing.
I think we've seen that also, that, yeah, sometimes you don't need to mention climate and people might get more engaged if you talk about, kind of economic considerations or other, other upsides to addressing things that also happen to reduce emissions. So I think that, again, there is climate fatigue out there. And so that's one of the reasons why it's important to figure out, what are other angles into a story that might be able to connect with folks.
Yeah, when it comes to local journalism, the projects that we are getting, as proposals from local newsrooms, those are the stories we're looking for. We're looking for those crossover stories. Like, for example, in North Carolina, there was a project that we supported that was looking at the kind of intersection of how climate change was affecting local fisheries, but it looked at sport fishermen. It's a whole new audience of people that may not have thought about how climate might be impacting their recreation. And we've consistently sort of looked for those types of stories produced and reported by the newsrooms from those communities, because they best understand how that audience will want to relate or engage with those climate topics.
I also just feel like we know from like the Yale Center on Climate Communication that there just aren't that many deniers. And so focusing my intention, like, they're probably overrepresented in our government, but still, like, broadly, there aren't that many. So I just am at a point now where I don't spend a lot of energy thinking about them, because they're not, like, the issue and why we haven't acted on climate change is not because people don't accept the science. Like, there are bigger structural reasons why, and spending time focusing on deniers or denialists or whatever you want to call them, instead of the structural underpinnings of, like, why haven't we acted on climate, or what are the things that we need to do to act on climate, it just feels like a waste of my time.
Got it. I think final question, it's a bit of a softball, but I'd love if each of you could talk about one story or project, you've already mentioned some, that you've worked on in the past year or two that you really think sort of captures the essence of this conversation, which is about thinking about climate change of the moment and how to cover climate differently now than maybe in the past, or just you think would be illustrative for the audience about how you approach either leading or producing climate journalism. Steve, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think for us, or I should say for our grantees, we want to support them to do projects reporting on climate that will best engage with their local communities. Not just the reporting, but can we also help enable conversations beyond the reporting within that community? So back to the example of the North Carolina State of Change project. I mean, we really liked that project because these are great broadcast stories about North Carolinians kind of adapting and finding their own solutions to dealing with climate change in their own backyard. The grantees at North Carolina Public Television also created a 1-hour documentary out of the series, and they took that to they take it to an annual science festival where they're engaging with students and teachers on this topic too. So they're using that information and that reporting to help enable more conversations and more broader conversations about it throughout the communities they're being impacted. And that's what we try to do with our journalism. We support the reporting with our grantees, but we also like to work with them to help engage audiences on that topic, keep the conversation going. I think that's really important with this issue, is to make sure that we don't just keep reporting the calamities, the hurricanes, and just let it drop. We've got to find the good stories that resonate and then keep conversations going with audiences and people who really care about these issues.
And if I could mention our Unearthing the Future series, that I really think speaks to one of the ways that we're trying to cover climate. It's a paleo climate series, which is a true collaboration between a number of different reporters affiliated with our team, including Sarah Kaplan, who tends to write on these topics, Simone DeCroquet, a graphics reporter on our team, Bonnie Jo Mount, a photographer, and then Emily Wright and Frank Hurley Jones, both designers. Really together, they have been capturing how you can look in the deep past and see how the climate has changed, whether it's thousands or millions of years ago, and what that tells us about where we are now and where we're headed. And the idea is, I just think we think differently about how we do journalism. Certainly when I started covering these things, you would think about the reporting out the text, and you would maybe think about what kind of photos you wanted to go with it. And we're really trying to create these immersive experiences which transport people both to far-flung places, which they might not go to, including a remote research spot in Greenland, or to a lake that scientists have known about, and where Indigenous First Nation people have lived in Canada for years, but most people aren't visiting it, and use that to really understand how the planet has changed in the past and how it will as a result of our actions.
I think the thing that I would mention is actually a collaboration that we did earlier this year with Press Trust of India, major news organization in India. It's a customer of the AP. They had indicated that they wanted to do more climate coverage, and essentially kind of asked for some help how to do that. And so we put together a week-long training where we sent several people from the climate team and teamed them up with reporters from Press Trust of India, and it was really a skills transfer on both sides. I mean, we did a lot of training around climate journalism and the basics, and how we approach things. But then we also learned a tremendous amount from them, because on our side, we have, you know, one person from climate in India, and as a team, we want to cover a lot more of India. And so we were able to just learn a ton from the Press Trust of India journalists. And then through that, we worked on 7 different stories together, looking at different issues, mostly biodiversity issues, in southeastern India. And so for me, that was a really gratifying experience, because not only did we do really cool journalism, but we learned a lot from each other. We taught a lot, and I think, like, as a team, part of our mission is to help others and work with others to lift up their coverage. And it's been really cool since we published those stories, just seeing those journalists from PTI who went through that. Like, many of them are writing lots of climate stories, you know, and so it's just amazing. And I think our whole team is much more also keyed into India, and, you know, does a lot more with India. So that's the kind of thing that I think back on, like, in the year, and be like, that was really cool in 2023.
This isn't something that I've worked on, but that our team has, which is, we know that construction and building has a huge climate footprint. And so we've been spending a lot of time looking at the reemergence of wood as, like, mass timber as a building material, and sort of really digging into sort of the pros and the cons and the limitations and some of the climate claims that are being made that aren't necessarily holding up to scrutiny.